Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is a 10-minute Bible Hour podcast. And we're working our way through the book of Esther right now. We're in Esther chapter 6. We're at the hilarious pivot point of this book where the bad guy, the enemy of the Jews, just wants to kill everybody, Haman. He's full of pride, and he thinks he's like 1 second away from being granted king for a day privileges and being given a triumph through the city streets of Susa, dressed up like the king, people even mistaking him for the king, with some poor chump leading him around saying, this is what happens for the person the king delights to honor. He's imagining that every knee is going to bow and every tongue is going to confess that Haman is the awesomest, but then it's all just yanked away from him. And instead, that honor is afforded to his blood enemy, Mordecai the Jew. And Haman turns out to have to be the chump who leads him around saying all of that nice stuff about him. It's just awesome. But is it the most famous parade in the whole Bible? I would argue probably not. And further, I would argue that in a way, the idea of a parade is one of the really big themes, motifs, promises that is woven through all of Scripture, the Old and the New Testament as well. We'll talk about that a little bit also. But first, let's talk about some of the other famous parades in the Bible. I'm not going to get them all, but here are the ones that jump out to me. The first one is a procession that goes on dry land across the Red Sea in the book of Exodus, when the Hebrews are miraculously led out of captivity by God, and then the Egyptians try to have a parade after that and chase them through there, but it doesn't work. The whole thing gets crashed in on, their parade gets rained on, if you will. Ugh, I don't know how I feel about that line. Whatever, there it is, I said it. So then after that, you get another kind of procession out in the desert with the wandering. It's a 40-year parade. It's a dark parade compared with the light parade of escaping Egypt. But then you get another positive procession when there's another parting of the waters and crossing of the waters across the Jordan River, as a generation of Hebrews later finally crosses under the leadership of Joshua into the Holy Land. That happens in the book of Joshua. And then after that, still in the book of Joshua, you get another parade. This one has music, and this one happens like 7 times. This is the one around the walls of Jericho, which is the first big city, the first big battle in the conquest period, where the Hebrew people were conquering Canaan, taking the Holy Land. And this is another parade or procession that has miraculous elements. Well, I mean, really miraculous elements to it. The music plays, and then God knocks down the massive walls of Jericho. It's quite the powerful metaphor, really. It's just taken down to rubble, and it opens the gates wide for them to come into the Holy Land, into the land of Canaan. Then we fast forward a little bit into the era of the kings, and one of the first great kings, the second one really, King David, has a moment where he recovers the ark, and that's not the Noah's Ark, by the way. This is the Ark of the Covenant, the one from Raiders of the Lost Ark. And he dances and sings and even gets maybe a little bit over the top with his dancing as this parade, this procession to lead the Ark of the Covenant back into the possession of God's chosen people happens. Then the next parade that comes to mind, just going straight through the Bible, I suppose is the one that we're looking at right here. I think there are some processions in the book of Nehemiah with Ezra and the reading of the law and the dedication of the walls, if you will, and all of that kind of stuff. But chronologically, that happens after Haman and Mordecai's parade right here. So we got Haman's parade that we're looking at here. Then we have that procession that I was referencing back in Jerusalem. That would happen a couple decades after the events that we're looking at here in Esther chapter 6. And I think after that, just going straight through the Bible, the next significant parade I can think of is maybe the most significant parade in the Bible, number 1 or 1A. It's these next two. It's the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem in Matthew chapter 21. And think about that. We call it the triumphal entry. And that doesn't just mean like victory, he's winning. I mean, Jesus doesn't really look like he's winning during the triumphal entry. He's riding on a donkey. He isn't dressed in fancy clothes. It's not a war horse, but he is being led into the city, and he is being hailed, and many knees are bowing and many tongues are confessing that he is the Son of David, maybe the Son of Man. They don't know quite what to do with him during this procession, but this is fashioned in the style of a triumph. And that's what the original audience would have compared it to in Matthew 21. They would have thought of the stuff we were talking about yesterday with Pompey or Caesar or Sulla or Marius or any of these great commanders. And they would have been thinking about how strange it is and how bizarre and different the values of this king making this kind of triumph, this triumphal entry, are from all of the kings that they're used to, all of the leaders that they're used to. I mean, they would ride in with all of their regalia and try to look as awesome as possible. But Jesus looks like he values very different things than the world values. And this contrast in parades between a Roman triumph and Jesus' triumphal entry is absolutely on purpose. But the contrast between a Roman triumph and the next big parade in the Bible is even bigger, that being Jesus' journey to the cross, carrying his cross and getting flogged and bloodied, and he's wearing a mock crown of thorns. He's wearing the mockery of a robe at times in the process he is anyway. Instead of barbarian captives and their now stripped naked king being mocked in front of jeering and cheering Roman hordes, it's the king himself who's being mocked in front of those hordes as he makes his way to his ultimate death on the cross. So I'd say that, or the triumphal entry, or maybe it's a tie between the two. I mean, those are the most memorable processions in the entire Bible. But in addition to these tangible narrative examples of parades throughout the Bible, and all of these are very meaningful and definitely communicate important theology stuff, there's also this big picture theme that runs through the whole Bible that points to a procession that is going to happen one day. And the prophets talk about it. Isaiah, Ezekiel hints at it. Zechariah seems fascinated by this idea. It gets a nod in Revelation. Even the Apostle Paul seems to be talking about this same type of procession. And this is the procession that is the payoff on the promise that God made to Abraham way back in the book of Genesis, where you'll remember God picks Abram. That's what he was called at the time. Later, he becomes known as Abraham. He picks him for no apparent reason. It's like, I'm going to be your God, and you are going to follow me, and I'm going to make a great nation out of you. You're going to have all these descendants, and you're going to be blessed, and also you're going to be a blessing to all the nations. And there's this theme throughout the Bible about this idea of a nation of priests. The Jews are a nation of priests, Christians in a way. Jesus describes Christians as a city on a hill. There's New Testament language about a royal priesthood. And what does a priest do? Well, it's a go-between between God and man. A good priest, their designation was to lead people into the presence of God while assuming the right posture before God. So in Isaiah 2:3, man, we're right on the edge time-wise. I'm just going to do it. I don't know if we'll go long or not, but I don't know. I don't really want to break it up. So Bible drill. There we go. Isaiah 2 and verse 3. It says, many peoples will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between the nations, and he'll settle disputes for many people. They will beat their swords into plowshares. They're not going to need to have instruments of war anymore, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. So Isaiah envisions this future where even with all the fumbling and bumbling and sideways maneuvers and stuff not going right, that the purpose of the Jewish people is going to be fulfilled, or one of the big purposes, which is they're going to be a blessing to the nations. And of course, Jesus is Jewish. He comes out of this. He's part of that promise. But Isaiah doesn't stop there. Later in the book of Isaiah, in chapter 66, I'm getting close, and verse 23, one more page turn. This is right at the very, very end of the book. It says, well, let's go verse 22. As the new heavens and the new earth that I will make will endure before me, declares the Lord, so will your name and descendants endure. From one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, all mankind will come and bow down before me, says the Lord. And then the book closes with a word of warning to those who don't do so. And then as promised, over in Zechariah, a book that has quickly become one of my very favorites in the whole Bible. I don't think I appreciated it properly until you and I worked our way through the book of Matthew, and there were all those allusions to Zechariah. And then we did season 2 of this podcast through the Bible, doing one book per day. And I relished my time in Zechariah. I have put this on audiobook, and I can't tell you how many times this year alone I've read Zechariah or listened to it on audiobook, at least 15 at this point. And as I'm sitting here recording this, I got 3 months to go yet this year. Let's see if I can make it to 20. I'm loving this book and this big picture vision for the future that is in it. Zechariah 8, verse 20. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Many peoples and the inhabitants of many cities will yet come, and the inhabitants of one city will go to another and say, let us go at once to entreat the Lord and seek the Lord Almighty. I myself am going, and many peoples and powerful nations will come to Jerusalem to seek the Lord Almighty and to entreat him. And then at the end of the book, in chapter 14, verse 16, you get the same kind of stuff. Then the survivors from all the nations that have attacked Jerusalem will go up year after year, not to keep attacking, but to worship the King, the Lord Almighty, and to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. I don't think it's crazy to look at this little detail in the story of Esther and the little surprise parade of Mordecai, the reversal of processions that go from looking like a mockery of what is right, a mockery of justice, even a mockery of God, and how that gets flipped into an honoring of what is right and true, and that even the enemy of Mordecai, be it very reluctantly, is acknowledging something that is true and right and good in that situation. It feels like there's a little hint there, a little nod to this motif that runs throughout the whole Bible, that the end game here of everything is not endless strife until the end of time and it'll just never get sorted out, but rather that there is an end game. And according to the vision of the Bible and the prophets and Jesus himself, that end game is the nations, even the particularly hostile ones, eventually getting to that every knee will bow, every tongue will confess place. And the nations, all the disparate peoples of the world, are going to come before the throne of God and acknowledge the one true God. And that will be the grandest human procession in all of the history of ever, all of the history of humanity. That is where this thing is heading. So it's a very positive, very optimistic, very promising, very hopeful vision of the future under God's providence as he directs history to this end. So it seems like we're just talking about a little parade here in Esther chapter 6, and it's a fun little twist on things. But when we look at that theme throughout the Bible, I think we see that it's maybe a nod to something even bigger. And even if it isn't some kind of very intentional nod on the part of the author, it is still entirely reasonable for us in the context of the larger Bible to look at that and be like, that reminds me of this bigger thing that's happening in the Bible. And I happen to really like that bigger thing that is happening in the Bible. Okay, that was kind of a lot today, but I had fun. We're going to wrap it up right there. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.